The old house stood silent under the Virginia sun, its white columns like bones against the sky. It was a beautiful, terrible place. To the world, Greenbrier was a picture of grace. But within its walls, the air was thick with unspoken things. This was my world for 30 years, her world, and in the end became our shared cursed ground. My name is Isaiah. I was brought to Greenbrier as a boy, too young to understand the weight of the chains, only their cold bite. The mistress of the house was Eleanor Carter, a woman of fine linen and a heart like flint. She believed in order, in discipline, in the absolute power her station granted her. And she believed correction was a daily sacrament. It began small. A misplaced glance, a spoon polish to the wrong shine. The first time she called me to the morning room, I was trembling. She had a whip, not the coarse thing used in the fields, but a slender, vicious tool of braided leather. For the house servants, she would say, her voice calm as Sunday, we require precision. The pain was a shock, a line of fire across my back. I learned to make no sound. The silence that followed my stifled gasp was worse, filled only with the rustle of her skirts as she returned to her correspondence. The whippings became as regular as the chiming of the clock, morning after inspection. There was always a reason. Dust on a frame, a rose not perfectly arranged, a shadow of discontent she claimed to see in my eyes. She whipped me daily. It was not just punishment. It was a ritual, a reaffirmation of her dominion. I would stand, my forehead pressed against the cool wallpaper of the hallway, hearing the soft hiss of the leather through the air before the sting. My world narrowed to the pattern of the vines on the wall, to the counting of my own breaths, to the sound of her steady, unlabored breathing behind me. I grew into a man under that regime, my body marked with a map of her cruelty, my spirit hardening into something dark and patient. Hatred is a plant that needs no light. It grows in the cellar of the soul. I tended mine. I became the perfect servant, silent, efficient, invisible. I learned her rhythms, her tastes, her vulnerabilities. She favored a certain tea in the afternoons, a blend of chamomile and lavender to soothe her nerves, which were often frayed by the immense burden of her own bitterness. She slept poorly, and a tonic of valerian root sat on her knitstand, prescribed by a doctor who asked no questions of a lady's constitution. The kitchen became my laboratory, the garden my apothecary. I knew the plants, the old knowledge passed in whispers from my grandmother, who had known the land in a different time. I began to collect. A few berries from the pokeweed crushed and dried, the leaves of the foxglove carefully harvested and powdered, a tincture of bitter nightshade, drop by careful drop. Tincture of bitter nightshade, drop by careful drop. The poisoning was not a deed of drama, but of gradual art. It was the slowing of a clock, not the smashing of its face. A pinch of powder in the tea leaves, so slight the flavor merely deepened, becoming earthier. A drop of tincture in the tonic, mingling with its natural bitterness. This was not the poison of kings, bringing a man down in agonized throes before the court. This was the poison of the powerless, a slow, patient reclaiming of time. The changes were subtle. A slight tremor in her hand one morning as she lifted her cup, a new pallor under her powder, a fatigue that lingered past noon. She complained of headaches, of a metallic taste on her tongue. The doctor was summoned more frequently. He spoke of vapors, of female troubles, of the strain of managing an estate. He prescribed rest, sea air, stronger tonics. I prepared them all, my additions now a constant, careful thread woven into the fabric of her care. And I smiled. Not a broad, visible grin that would have been death, but a small, private turning of the spirit. When she would snap at me, her voice weaker than it once was, and I would bow and say, "Yes, mistress," with flawless deference. Inside I was smiling. When she took to her bed for days at a time, and the house grew quieter, lighter, as if exhaling a breath it had held for decades, I would polish the silver and smile. It was the smile of the gardener who sees the first green shoot of a long-planted seed breaking the soil. My revenge was not in her death, but in her decay. I was dismantling her piece by piece as she had tried to dismantle me. The whip gathered dust in a drawer. Her orders became querulous, confused. She who had commanded with such terrifying clarity began to forget names, to repeat herself, to stare out the window at the quarters where we lived with a new, unreadable fear in her eyes. The real twist, the first revirevolta of the heart, came on a wet autumn evening. She was particularly frail, propped on pillows, the great canopy bed seeming to swallow her. The fire was low. I was adding a log when she spoke, her voice a papery whisper. "Isaiah," I turned. "Mistress?" She looked at me, really looked, and for a moment the haze of illness and my careful, patient toxins seemed to part. "You have been here a long time," she said. "Yes, mistress." "I see you," she said. And in those 3 words, a universe of horror opened. Did she mean she saw my servitude? Or did she, in some deep animal corner of her mind, see me? The man who brought her tea and medicine and slow extinction. Her eyes, sunken and yellowed, held mine. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft. I held her gaze, my face the usual mask of blank obedience. She looked away first, toward the fire. "The pain is very strange," she murmured, almost to herself. I said nothing. I stirred her tonic, the glass clinking softly in the quiet room. The moment passed, but the unease remained. She saw something. Not the truth, perhaps, but the shadow of it. And in that she had, for an instant, reclaimed a sliver of power. The second twist was her son Julian, returning from his studies in the north. He was a different creature, bookish, with ideas that sat uncomfortably in a slaveholder's coat. He was troubled by the institution, he said. He spoke in vague terms of manumission, of moral burden. He saw his mother's decline and was filled with his son's grief and a reformer's energy. He dismissed the old doctor and brought in a new man from Richmond, a young physician with modern ideas. This was a danger I had not foreseen. The new doctor was sharp-eyed. He asked questions about her diet, her medicines. He examined the bottles on her knitstand. My heart was a drum in a silent cave. He could unravel everything. My careful, years-long work could be discovered in an afternoon by this earnest stranger with his stethoscope and skepticism. I had to become even more careful. The poisons were paused, hidden away. Her decline, which had been a steady slope, now plateaued. She even rallied slightly under the new doctor's care-clean food, fresh air, simple tonics. This rally was a new kind of torment. The color that briefly returned to her cheek was an insult. The strength with which she once again, for a fleeting period, commanded a dinner party was a phantom of the tyranny I had worked so hard to erode. Julian beamed, believing in progress, in science, in his own goodness. I had to watch and wait and seethe. My smile became harder to maintain. I saw the old flicker of her cruelty return, directed at a new maid. The sound of a slap, followed by a weep, echoed through the house one afternoon, and it was as if all the old wounds on my back burned afresh. The work was not done. It could not be undone by a boy's conscience or a doctor's diligence. So I adapted. The new doctor was vigilant about her medicines, but he could not watch the kitchen, the garden, the very air she breathed. I turned to more subtle means. A pollen dusted on her pillow that brought on fits of sneezing and exhaustion. A tea made from the roots of a common plant, which, when steeped too long, brought cramps and a deepening weakness. It was slower, riskier, but it was the only path left. The final, greatest twist was one of perverse intimacy. As she grew truly, terminally ill, beyond the help of any doctor, a strange dependency bloomed. I was the constant. The doctors came and went. Julian traveled for business, his conscience soothed by the presence of the medical man. But I was always there. I lifted her, bathed her, fed her the broths that I had prepared. I was the one who heard her ramblings, her regrets, her fears of hellfire. In those last weeks, the boundary between jailer and prisoner, between victim and avenger, between poisoner and caretaker, blurred into a gray, awful mist. Her body was a ruin, and I was its sole custodian. The whip was forgotten. The power had shifted so completely it had become a grotesque parody of devotion. She would cling to my arm with skeletal fingers, her eyes wide with a terror that was no longer of me, but of the void she was entering. "Don't leave," she would whisper. And I would not. I would sit through the long nights, watching the labored rise and fall of her chest. The hatred did not leave me, but it was joined by a profound, unsettling exhaustion. This was my creation. This shivering, broken thing was the masterpiece of my vengeance. I had wanted her to feel small, to feel pain, to vanish. Now, witnessing the utter, lonely ruin of a human soul, the victory tasted of ash. The end came on a spring morning. The dogwoods were in bloom, a cruel parody of new life outside her window. She was barely conscious. I had given her the last gentle dose, not enough to kill, but enough to ease the final struggle. It was a mercy I had not intended to give, a contradiction that sickened me even as I performed it. She opened her eyes once, very clear, and looked at me. There was no recognition of Isaiah the slave, nor of Isaiah the poisoner. There was only the confused, desperate look of a creature leaving its shell. Then she was gone. The house erupted in the loud silence of death. There were cries, arrangements, the arrival of the black-clad guests. Julian was devastated. The young doctor was perplexed, muttering about the weaknesses of the female constitution and strange, wasting ailments. I moved through it all, the perfect, grieving servant. They praised my loyalty, my dedication in her final days. I stood at her graveside, head bowed, as they lowered the polished box into the Virginia earth. The preachers spoke of a righteous woman, a pillar of the community, called home to God. I listened, and inside, where no one could see, I completed the story. The story that began with the hiss of leather and ended with the rattle of a last breath. She had whipped me daily, seeking to break my spirit to the shape of her will. And I had poisoned her slowly, reclaiming my life, minute by stolen minute, until her time was gone. And throughout, I had smiled. It was a smile that began in hot hatred and ended in the cold, empty halls of a freedom that felt like just another kind of prison. The inheritance of my vengeance was not land or gold. It was the house itself, now filled with her ghost and my memory. It was the knowledge in my hands, a terrible power. It was the unending silence where the sound of the whip used to be. I had won, and in winning, I had learned that some battles leave no survivors, only different kinds of the dead, walking through the beautiful, terrible quiet of a world they have destroyed together.